Ayla smelled saffron and cumin wafting from the kitchen when she heard the first bark. It was a different sound, not the playful yap Rex made when David returned from school, but something guttural, desperate, as if the animal were trying to warn of an unseen danger. She paused the spoon mid-stir, letting the steam from the Turkish stew envelop her face as she strained her ears. Silence. Only the low sizzle of oil in the pan and her own breath, which had become shallower without her realizing it. 9 years in Brazil had taught Ayla to distinguish every sound of the small house in a fictional suburban town. She knew the specific groan of the front door when the wind pushed against it, the creak of the tin roof expanding under the afternoon sun, even the pattern of David's footsteps descending the stairs in the morning, always 3 steps at a time, then a pause to tie his sneakers. But this bark didn't belong to the safe soundtrack she had memorized. She wiped her hands on her embroidered apron, a gift from Julia last Christmas, and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the backyard stretched in an irregular patch of green, dotted with the jaboticaba trees she had planted in her first year in Brazil. David was crouched near the back fence, exactly where the land made a strange curve, hidden by the shadow of the old chicken coop she'd never had the heart to tear down. Rex stood a few feet from him, rigid, his snout pointed at something she couldn't see. "David!" she yelled from the window, but her voice came out shriller than she intended. The boy looked up, wiping his dirt-stained hands on his shorts. At 9, he had his father's dark eyes, a memory she preferred not to dwell on, but the smile was all his own, open and curious, like a constant question about the world. "I found something, Mom," he yelled back, waving. "Come see." Ayla hesitated. Since arriving in Brazil with forged documents and a 3-month-old baby in her arms, she had developed a silent paranoia that followed her like a shadow. She knew it was irrational. 9 years was a long time. Murat probably didn't even remember her anymore, but some inner wounds never fully healed. She still dreamed sometimes of the night she discovered the secret files hidden in his office, photographs of women who later disappeared, coded reports mentioning necessary eliminations. She turned off the stove and went out the back door, feeling the red earth stick to her sandals. The March sun was gentle, but there was a heavy humidity in the air that made her cotton dress cling to her back. As she approached, she saw that David had dug an uneven hole at the foot of the fence. His small hands held something metallic, covered in rust and dirt. "It was buried deep," he said, proud of his discovery. "Rex smelled it first. He kept digging and digging until I saw it." Ayla felt her blood run cold even before she focused on the object. It was a small box, about the size of a book, with old hinges and a lock that seemed intact despite the years. But it wasn't that which terrified her. Engraved on the lid, still visible under the oxidation, was a symbol she would recognize anywhere, an 8-pointed star with eyes in the center, the emblem of the Black Watch. "Mom!" David frowned, noticing how she had stopped breathing. "Are you okay?" Ayla extended her trembling hands and took the box. The metal was cold, colder than it should have been after hours in the sun. The inscriptions around the star were in Ottoman Arabic, an ancient dialect that only the most senior members of the organization knew. Her legs went weak. The world began to spin slightly, as if the Earth's axis had shifted a few degrees. "David!" Her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "Go inside, now!" "But Mom, I want to see what's—" "Now!" The shout was louder than she intended, laden with a panic she couldn't control. David recoiled, frightened. She never yelled at him, never. It was one of the unwritten rules she had set for herself, to give the boy the peaceful childhood she'd never had. Rex was still standing in the same place, but now Ayla noticed something different. The dog wasn't looking at the box. He was looking beyond the fence, as if observing something in the dense woods surrounding the property. His ears were pricked, his snout drawn back. A low growl vibrated in his throat. Ayla took David's hand. and pulled him into the house, locking the door with the speed of someone fleeing a fire. Her hands trembled so much that she dropped the box on the kitchen floor. The clang of metal against tile echoed through the house like a death knell. "Mom, you're scaring me," David murmured, leaning against the wall. His dark eyes were wide, the childlike confidence giving way to an insecurity he couldn't name. Ayla knelt and hugged him tightly, smelling the sweet scent of children's shampoo in his brown hair. "I'm sorry, my love," she whispered. "Mommy just got scared by a bad memory." But as she said this, her mind was working at maximum speed. The box wasn't there by chance. Someone had deliberately buried it in the backyard of the house where she had lived for 9 years. Someone who knew the symbol of the Black Watch. Someone who knew exactly where to find it. Murat. The name echoed in her head like a death sentence. After 9 years of peace, he had found her. That night, after David fell asleep, Ayla sat at the kitchen table staring at the box. She tried everything sharp she could find in the house. Knives, screwdrivers, even the can opener. But the antique lock was tougher than it looked. She'd need a professional, but that meant exposing the object to others, a risk she couldn't take. At 2 a.m., she heard the first strange sound. It was like someone walking around the house, but the footsteps were uneven, hesitant. They'd stop for a few seconds, then resume, then stop again. Ayla turned off all the lights and hid behind the living room curtain, peering through the crack. The almost full moon cast a silvery, ghostly light on the backyard. She didn't see anything, but Rex was restless again, growling low on the other side of the fence. At 3:30 a.m., the streetlights flickered 3 times and went out. The whole neighborhood plunged into darkness. At 4 a.m., Rex stopped growling. Suddenly, as if silenced. Ayla spent the rest of the night awake, clutching a kitchen knife and watching the window. When the sun rose, she found Rex unconscious in the neighbor's yard, breathing but unresponsive. Mrs. Margaret, the retired woman next door, said the dog had been like that since 4 a.m., as if drugged. But Julia was too smart to swallow such a vague explanation. She approached and examined the object carefully. Ayla saw the exact moment the young woman noticed the strange inscriptions and the symbol engraved on the lid. "This is Arabic?" she asked. "Ottoman Turkish," Ayla automatically corrected, then regretted it. It was too much information. Julia stared at her with an expression Ayla had never seen before. It wasn't just curiosity, it was suspicion. "Ayla," she said slowly, "can you read Ottoman Turkish?" The silence that followed was heavy as a stone. David looked from one to the other, sensing the tension without understanding it. Ayla could lie, invent some excuse about having studied languages in college, but something in Julia's expression told her it wouldn't work. "Yes," she finally admitted, "I can." "And what does it say?" Ayla took a deep breath. The words engraved around the star formed a phrase that had haunted her since adolescence. "For those who cannot forget, the vigil is eternal." "It's just a religious phrase," she lied. "Nothing important," but Julia continued to watch her with those penetrating eyes. "Ayla, since I've been working here, you've never talked about your family in Turkey. You've never received a letter, a phone call. You've never celebrated any Turkish holidays with David. It's as if your life began when you arrived in Brazil." Ayla felt her heart pound. Julia was right, of course. 9 years trying to be invisible, and now a box buried in the backyard threatened to crumble everything. "Some families are complicated," she said, trying to end the subject. "And some people are running from something," Julia replied softly. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement laden with concern. "Ayla, if you have a problem, I can help, but I need to know what's going on." Before Ayla could answer, David interrupted. "Mom, can you ask your Antonio to open the box? He has a bunch of keys in his workshop. Her Antonio was the neighborhood locksmith, a 60-year-old man who repaired locks and made key copies in a tiny workshop in the center of the fictional suburban town. He was discreet, trustworthy, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Ayla looked at the box, then at Julia, then at her son. Maybe it was time to stop running. "Okay," she finally said, "let's open this box." Antonio's workshop smelled of machine oil and oxidized metal. Old tools hung from the walls like surgical instruments, and the yellowish light of an incandescent bulb made shadows dance in the corners. The man examined the box's lock with his reading glasses perched on his nose, turning the object in every direction. "It's an old mechanism," he murmured. "European, I'd say. But the metal is good quality. I'll need about 15 minutes. Ayla, Julia and David waited on a small plastic chair in the corner of the workshop. The sound of tools echoed in the cramped space, each click and scrape amplified by the tension. David swung his legs, anxious, while Julia watched Ayla with growing concern. It was obvious the woman was terrified of what they might find inside the box. "Ready," Antonio announced, carefully lifting the lid. There was no secret, the lock was just jammed with rust. Ayla approached slowly, as if the box might explode. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were three objects that made her world collapse again. The first was a black and white photograph. Murat, in a younger military uniform, stood alongside other men she recognized from the secret files she'd found years ago. They all wore the same insignia, an 8-pointed star with eyes in the center. The second item was a coded document written in cipher. She knew what kind of code it was. She'd learned to decipher it when she was still married to Murat. It was a list of names and addresses, and at the top of the list, written in red ink, was her real name, Aishi Kara. The third object made her legs wobble. It was a necklace with a pendant identical to the symbol on the box, but this one she recognized specifically. It was what Murat wore around his neck, always hidden under his shirt. What he claimed was a family protection amulet. "Mom?" David touched her arm. "Are you okay?" Julia had also approached and was observing the contents of the box with wide eyes. "Ayla, who is that man in the picture?" Ayla closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was a new determination in her gaze. If Murat was playing mind games with her, burying clues in her backyard, maybe it was time to turn the tables. "He's my ex-husband," she said simply, "and he's not a good person." That night, after David went to sleep, Ayla told Julia everything. She talked about Istanbul, about her arranged marriage at 19 to a man 15 years older who worked for the government, about how she gradually discovered that Murat's administrative work involved identifying and eliminating political opponents, about the night she found the secret files in his office, photographed everything with an old cell phone, and anonymously sent it to a European newspaper. She talked about her desperate escape, 7 months pregnant, using false documents obtained by a women's protection organization. About David's birth in Brazil, the name changes. About 9 years of living like a ghost, always looking over her shoulder. And she talked about the Black Watch, a secret cell within Turkish intelligence itself, responsible for the most delicate disappearances, people who simply vanished without a trace, as if they had never existed. Julia listened in silence, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. When Ayla finished, the young woman took a few minutes to process the information. "So the box," she began, "is a message," Ayla finished. "He found me, and he wants me to know it. Why didn't he just do what he usually does?" Ayla smiled bitterly. "Because I have something he wants back. The evidence I photographed was never fully published. The European newspaper only used a small portion in the report. The rest is still stored in an email account that only I know." "And where's that account?" "On my phone, protected by passwords I've changed dozens of times over the years." Julia got up and started pacing the room. Ayla, you need to give this to the police, to Interpol, to someone, and put David at even greater risk. If I publicly denounce Murat, he'll have no more reason to keep me alive. He'll eliminate the whole family and look for the evidence later. Then what are you going to do? Ayla looked out the window. Outside, the street was dark and silent, but she could feel invisible eyes watching her. I don't know, not yet. But she lied. She already knew exactly what she would do. The next morning, Ayla woke up with the feeling that something was different in the house. She couldn't identify what, but there was a subtle disturbance in the air, as if someone had moved things during the night. She walked through the rooms, checking doors and windows, but everything was locked as she had left it. It was in the kitchen that she found the first clue. The chair where Julia always hung her bag was slightly out of place, the sugar bowl on. The counter was a few inches to the left. Small details that a normal person wouldn't notice, but Ayla had spent 9 years memorizing every inch of the house. Someone had been there during the night. She ran to David's room and found him sleeping, soundly, his breathing regular and peaceful. Still, she checked every corner of the room, looking for signs of intrusion. That's when she noticed the window was slightly ajar, just a few inches, but she always left it completely closed. The blood froze in her veins. Someone had entered her son's room. "David," she whispered, shaking him gently. "Wake up, my love." The boy slowly opened his eyes, still sleepy. "What is it, Mom? Did you sleep well? Didn't you wake up during the night?" "I slept," he yawned, "but I had a strange dream." Ayla felt her heart pounding. What kind of dream? There was a man at the window. He called me by a different name, Mehmet, I think. He said he was going to take me to meet my real father. The world around Ayla began to spin. Mehmet was the Turkish name Murat wanted to give his son, the name she had categorically rejected when she was still pregnant. "It was just a dream, my love," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Daddy's dead, remember? He died before you were born." It was the lie she had been telling for 9 years. David believed that his father had died in a car accident in Istanbul shortly before his birth. It was easier than explaining that his father was an internationally wanted murderer. "I know," David murmured, snuggling under the covers. But the man in the dream seemed so real. Ayla kissed her son's forehead and left the room with shaky legs. There were no more doubts. Murat was there. He had invaded the house, spoken to David, planted dreams in the child's head. It was his method. First psychological terror, then physical, elimination. But this time, she wouldn't run. When Julia arrived for work, she found Ayla sitting at the kitchen table with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't fear or despair. It was a cold, calculated, dangerous anger. He was. "Here," she said without preamble. Julia dropped her bag on the floor. "What?" "During the night, he went into David's room. He spoke to him. He called him by the Turkish name he wanted to give the boy." "Ayla, this is..." Julia trailed off. She saw something in her employer's expression that made her reconsider. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to end this once and for all." Ayla stood up and went to the kitchen cabinet, removing a loose board at the back. From there, she took out an old cell phone, the same one she had used to photograph Murat's documents 9 years ago. It still worked. The evidence was still stored on it. "I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago," she said, turning on the device. "I'm going to destroy the Black Watch, and Murat with it." "How?" "I have contacts at the French consulate, people who owe me favors. They'll help me safely get the evidence to the international press." Julia approached. "And Murat? He's not just going to give up when the evidence is published." Ayla smiled, but there was no humor in the expression. "No, he'll try to kill me. That's why I need your help." My help for what? To pretend that I ran away with David while he's looking. For me, I'll be hiding here gathering more evidence. I'm sure he brought important documents to the US. Men like him never travel without backup files. Julia shook her head. This is crazy, Ayla. You're talking about using yourself as bait. It's the only way to permanently protect David. If I run away again, we'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulder. I don't want that for my son. Before Julia could reply, they heard a noise at the front door. 3 sharp knocks, then silence, then 3 more knocks. The 2 women exchanged glances. Nobody knocked on the door like that. Ayla grabbed a kitchen knife and cautiously approached the door. Who is it? Silence. She peered through the peephole and felt her blood run cold. There was nobody in the hallway, but on the floor, right in front of the door, was a yellow envelope. Julia, she whispered, take David and take him to his room. Lock the door and don't come out no matter what happens. As Julia disappeared, upstairs with the boy, Ayla carefully opened the door and picked up the envelope. Her hands trembled as she tore open the seal. Inside was a single photograph. David leaving school the previous day, alone, backpack on his back. Someone had circled the boy's face with red paint. On the back of the photo, a message in Turkish. Mehmet should meet his father's family. Ayla felt a wave of nausea. Murat wasn't just threatening her. He was claiming David. That's when she heard the phone ring. It was an unknown number, but she answered anyway. A familiar voice, heavy with a Turkish accent, echoed through the phone. Hello, Aishi. I missed you. Murat. My name is Ayla, she said with a firmness she didn't feel. He laughed. 9 years in Brazil haven't changed your stubbornness. That's good. It would be a shame if you had lost your personality. What do you want? I want my son, and I want the files you stole. David is not your son. You were never his father. Biologically, I am, and that's enough. The voice hardened. You have 1 hour to decide, Aishi. Either you come to me with the files, or I'll go get Mehmet from school. The call ended abruptly. Ayla stood in the middle of the room, holding the phone, trying to process what she had just heard. Murat knew where David went to school. He knew the school hours. He had mapped out the entire family's routine. She ran upstairs to the bedroom and found Julia sitting on the bed, hugging David. The boy seemed confused, but not scared. To him, it was still a game of adults he didn't understand. It was him, Ayla said simply. What does he want? David, and the evidence. Julia hugged the boy tighter. Now what? Ayla looked out the bedroom window. Down below, in the middle of the street, a dark car was parked. It wasn't there this morning. The windows were too dark to see who was inside, but she could feel eyes watching the house. Now I'm going to do something I should have done a long time ago, she said, pulling the old cell phone from her pocket. I'm going to call the press. But before she could dial, the house lights flickered 3 times and went out. The entire neighborhood plunged into darkness, just like the night before. And then they heard the sound of breaking glass downstairs. Someone had broken into the house. Ayla shoved Julia and David into the bedroom closet, whispering quick instructions. Stay here, don't make a sound. If anything happens to me, call the French consulate and talk to Marie Dubois. She'll know what to do. Ayla, no, Julia whispered back. Don't go down there. But Ayla was already leaving the room, knife in hand, her heart pounding like a war drum. She slowly descended the stairs, stepping only on the edges of the steps, to avoid making noise. The house was plunged into almost complete darkness, only a little moonlight coming through the windows. In the living room, a shadow moved. It was a tall man, dressed in dark clothes, who was rummaging through the furniture with precise and silent movements. He was looking for something specific. When he turned, Ayla saw the face that had haunted her nightmares for 9 years. Murat was older, gray hair at his temples, but his eyes remained the same, cold, calculating, without a trace of humanity. When he saw her at the foot of the stairs, he smiled. Aish, I'm glad you came down. It saves me time. How did you find me? I never stopped looking. You left enough clues over the years. The bank account you opened in Belo Horizonte, the boys' school registration, the health insurance. For someone trying to be invisible, you were quite careless. Ayla tightened her grip on the knife handle. David stays out of this. David? Murat laughed. You gave my son a Brazilian name? What a disrespect to family traditions. He's not your son. You were never his father. Biology disagrees, my dear. And now it's time for Mehmet to know his true roots over my dead body, if necessary. Murat took a step towards her, and Ayla saw he carried a silenced weapon. The black watch always worked silently. The files, Aishi, where are they? I destroyed everything years ago. Lies. If you had destroyed them, I would have killed you at the first opportunity. The fact that you're alive means you still have something I need. He was right, of course. The evidence was her only protection. But now that he was there in her living room, pointing a gun at her, Ayla realized she had underestimated his determination. You have 10 seconds, Murat said, checking his watch. After that, I'll go upstairs and get my son. And the nanny. Well, she's seen too much. It was then that Ayla heard an almost imperceptible noise from upstairs. Soft footsteps, trying to be silent. Her heart stopped. Julia was moving, probably trying to protect David, but unaware there were other men in the house, because now Ayla was sure. Murat didn't work alone. He never worked alone. The files are on a flash drive, she said quickly, trying to keep his attention focused on her. Hidden in the kitchen. Show me. Ayla walked slowly to the kitchen, Murat always a few steps behind. She could feel the barrel of the gun pressed against her back. In the kitchen, she pretended to search behind the cabinets, buying time, trying to think of a way to turn the situation around. That's when she heard David scream upstairs. The sound cut through the house like a knife, making Ayla turn instantly. Murat smiled. Looks like my colleagues found Mehmet first. Ayla didn't think. She just reacted. She spun around and plunged a knife into Murat's shoulder with all her might. He screamed in pain and dropped the gun, which slid across the kitchen floor. She ran towards the stairs, but he caught her before she reached the first step, pulling her by the hair. You bitch, he snarled, blood streaming down his wounded arm. You'll pay for this. They fought on the living room floor, Ayla scratching, biting, kicking with the desperation of a mother defending her son. Murat was stronger, but she was faster, fueled by 9 years of repressed rage. She managed to break free and ran to the kitchen, grabbing a heavy iron frying pan. When he followed her, staggering from his injury, she hit him on the head with the pan with a dull, terrible sound. Murat collapsed, unconscious. Ayla grabbed his gun and ran upstairs, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. In the second-floor hallway, she found a scene that chilled her blood. Julia was on the floor, unconscious, with a cut on her forehead. A tall, thin man held David by the arm, while another man ransacked the room. When they saw her, both drew their weapons. "Drop the gun," said the man holding David. He spoke Portuguese with a heavy accent. "Or the boy dies." Ayla stopped in the middle of the hallway, the gun trembling in her hands. David was crying, but trying to be brave. His dark eyes met hers, and she saw so much trust there that she almost collapsed. Her son believed she would save him. He had always believed. "Let him go," she said, in the firmest voice she could muster. "I'll give you the files. You take everything. But leave my son alone." "Your son?" the man laughed. "This boy is the son of Murat Özkan, a Black Watch officer. He's coming with us." "Never!" Ayla pointed the gun at the man's head, but he put David in front of his body as a human shield. The second man took advantage of the distraction and shot. The bullet hit Ayla's left shoulder, making her spin and fall against the wall. The pain was instant and brutal, radiating throughout her arm. The gun slipped from her hands and slid across the floor. "Mommy!" David screamed, trying to break free. Ayla was on the floor, bleeding but still conscious. She saw one of the men approaching her, while the other dragged David towards the stairs. This was where it would all end. 9 years of escape, of fear, of trying to build a normal life. And in the end, she had failed at the only thing that truly mattered: protecting her son. But then she heard a noise from outside. Sirens. Many sirens. The men also heard and looked at each other, confused. No one had called the police. How was that possible? That's when Julia stirred on the floor, slowly opening her eyes. Her hand held a cell phone. She had called emergency services as soon as the men broke into the room, but had pretended to be unconscious. "Police! Surround the house!" they shouted from outside. The man holding David hesitated for a split second, and that was enough. Ayla gathered all the strength she still had, ignored the searing pain in her shoulder, and threw herself against his legs. The man fell, dropping David, who ran away. The second man pointed his gun at Ayla, but before he could shoot, the front door was smashed in. Armed police stormed the house, shouting orders in Portuguese. What followed was chaotic. Shots, screams, confused commands. Ayla lost consciousness for a few minutes, waking up on the hallway floor with paramedics tending to her shoulder wound. David was sitting beside her, holding her good hand, crying but unharmed. "Mommy, are you okay?" "I am, my love," she whispered. "It's over." But it wasn't quite over. When she looked around, she saw that the two men were dead, but there was no sign of Murat. He had disappeared. "Where's the third man?" she asked the police officer coordinating the operation. "What third man? We only found 2 intruders." Ayla felt a chill down her spine. Murat had escaped, wounded but alive. And men like him never gave up. 3 months later, Ayla was sitting on a park bench in Brasilia, watching David play in the playground. Her arm still ached occasionally, but the doctor said she would regain full movement. Physically, she was healed. Emotionally, there was still work to do. Julia sat beside her, reading a book. After what had happened in the fictional suburban town, the young woman had become more than a nanny. She was practically family. She had moved to Brasilia with them, helping Ayla rebuild once again. "Any news?" Julia asked without looking up from her book. "The lawyer from the French consulate said the process is moving forward. The evidence I provided was enough to open an international investigation into the Black Watch. 3 officers have already been arrested in Turkey. And Murat?" Ayla sighed. "Still at large, but at least now he's also wanted by Interpol. He can no longer hide behind diplomatic immunity." David came running towards them, his face flushed from playing. At 10 years old, he was taller, more mature. The events in the fictional suburban town had forced him to grow up faster than Ayla would have liked, but he seemed to be adapting well to the new life. "Mum, can I stay a little longer?" "Of course, my love, but don't wander too far." As she watched him return to the playground, Ayla reflected on the changes of the past few months. They had a new house, new documents, a new identity built with official help this time. The Brazilian government had offered protection in exchange for information about the Black Watch, which apparently had cells operating in South America. For the first time in 9 years, Ayla felt truly safe. That's when she noticed the man sitting on the bench across the square. He was facing away, reading a newspaper, but there was something familiar about his posture. The way he held the paper, the tilt of his head. Ayla felt her blood run cold. "Julia," she whispered, "take David and go home. Now." "Why? What's wrong?" "Just do as I say, for God's sake." Julia saw the expression on Ayla's face and didn't argue. She got up, called David, and they left the square through a side entrance. Ayla sat watching the man across the square. Slowly, he folded the newspaper and turned around. It was Murat. He looked different. Scruff, simple clothes, a cap pulled low over his eyes, but it was him. He smiled as their eyes met, a cold smile she knew well. Ayla slowly got up and started walking in the opposite direction, trying not to show panic. But when she looked over her shoulder, she saw that he was following her. She quickened her pace. He quickened his pace too. She started to run. The chase lasted 3 blocks. Ayla ran through the streets of Brasilia, trying to blend into the crowd, looking for a police officer, a station, any safe place. But Murat knew the streets too. He had studied the city, prepared for this moment. Finally, she was cornered in a dead-end alley behind a shopping center. Murat appeared at the alley entrance, walking calmly as if he had all the time in the world. 9 years, Aishi. 9 years waiting for this moment. What do you want? The evidence has already been delivered. The Black Watch is over. The Black Watch never ends. It just transforms. He moved closer. But I didn't come here because of the organization. I came because of my son. David is not your son. Mehmet is my blood, and blood always calls to blood. Ayla leaned against the alley wall, looking for an escape that wasn't there. You'll never touch him again. I don't need to touch him, Aishi. He will come willingly. Never. Murat smiled and pulled something from his pocket. It was a recent photo of David at his new school. But it wasn't that which stopped Ayla's heart. It was what was written on the back of the photo in a childish handwriting. Daddy, I want to meet you, David. Impossible, Ayla whispered. He would never write that. Children are curious, Aishi, especially when they discover their mother lied about their father being dead. Ayla's world crashed down again. How did he? I have my methods. Some friends at his new school. A conversation here, another there. Mehmet now knows the truth, and he wants answers. You manipulated my son. I awakened his natural curiosity about his origins. It's not my fault if you built your new life on lies. Ayla felt tears burn her eyes. After everything she had been through, after all the sacrifices, Murat had found a way to reach David without even having to touch him. What do you want from me? I want you to stop running. I want you to accept reality. Mehmet needs to know his paternal family. He needs to learn about his Turkish roots. He needs to understand who he really is. And if I refuse, then I will. Tell him the whole truth about how you stole secret files, about how you destroyed his father's career, about how you forced the family into exile because of your betrayal. It was emotional blackmail, but Ayla knew it would work. David was at a vulnerable age, searching for identity, questioning everything. If Murat planted seeds of doubt about her, the boy might really choose to meet his father. You have 24 hours to decide, Murat said, starting to walk away. Tomorrow at the same time, in the square. Either you come with Mehmet, or I tell him the truth. The choice is yours. He disappeared into the alley entrance, leaving Ayla alone with her thoughts and fears. That night, Ayla lay awake in bed, listening to David's soft breathing in the next room. Julia slept on the living room sofa, and for the first time in months, the house felt safe. But safety was an illusion. It always had been. At 4 in the morning, she got up and went to the makeshift office she had set up in a corner of the living room. She turned on the computer and began to write a letter. It was addressed to David, but he should only read it when he was older. When he could understand the complexities of the situation, she explained everything in the letter. The truth about Murat, about the Black Watch, about why they had fled Turkey. She explained the lies she had told, but also the love that had motivated each one. She explained that everything she had done, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every change of identity, had been to protect him. When she finished writing, she sealed the letter in an envelope and hid it in a secret drawer of the desk. Then she picked up her phone and called Marie Dubois at the French consulate. Marie, it's Ayla. I need one last favor. Then you chose the hard way. You thought I was still running, but this time I came prepared. Murat frowned, realizing something was wrong. His two men also noticed the suspicious movement and began to stand. Murat Özkan, an amplified voice echoed through the square. You are surrounded. Federal police. Surrender peacefully. What followed was a confusion of shouts, running and gunfire. Ayla threw herself behind the bench, protecting herself, while Murat and his men tried to escape. But there was no escape. The operation had been planned with military precision. When the shooting stopped, two of the men were dead, and Murat was on the ground, wounded but alive, handcuffed and surrounded by federal police officers. Ayla approached him, who looked at her with a mixture of anger and respect. How? He murmured. You're not the only one with international contacts, she said. The difference is that mine fight for justice, not for power. This isn't over, Aishi. Others will come. Maybe, but you won't be among them. As the police took Murat away, Ayla felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't just the end of 9 years of running, it was the end of a lifetime of fear. 6 months later, Ayla was sitting on the porch of a new house in a small town in the interior of São Paulo. It was smaller than the previous one, simpler, but it was theirs, really theirs this time. No false documents, no invented identities, no constant fear of being discovered. David was in the backyard, planting jaboticaba saplings with Julia. At 10 years old, he'd become more questioning, more mature, but he still retained the curiosity and smile she loved so much. He had asked questions about his father, of course, especially after the events in Brasilia. Ayla had answered honestly, adapted to his age, explaining that his father was a dangerous person who had done bad things, and that's why they had needed to protect themselves. David had accepted the explanation with the resilience of children, but Ayla knew that more questions would come with time. When they did, she would be ready to answer them. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Marie Dubois. Ayla, I have news about Murat. Good or bad? Depends on the perspective. He was extradited to France yesterday. He will answer for crimes against humanity in the international court. Ayla closed her eyes, feeling a deep relief. How long? If convicted, life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. And the Black Watch? Officially dismantled. 15 officers arrested, cells in 6 countries disrupted. Of course, other organizations will emerge to fill the void, but this specific one is over. When she hung up the phone, Ayla spent a few minutes watching her son play in the backyard. For the first time in years, she could imagine a future without fear. She could imagine David growing up, studying, falling in love, building his own family, without having to look over his shoulder. It wouldn't be easy. Trauma took time to heal, and they would carry the scars of this experience forever. But they were alive, they were together, and they were free. And that, after everything they had been through, seemed like a miracle. That night, after David fell asleep, Ayla went to the backyard and knelt where the boy had planted the jaboticaba saplings. She dug a small hole with her hands and buried something she had carried for 9 years. The wedding ring Murat had given her. It wasn't just a symbol of the marriage that had ended. It was a symbol of a lifetime of fear, of escape, of lies necessary to survive. Burying it was like burying the past, not to forget it, but so that it would no longer control the future. When she covered the hole with earth, she felt as if she were planting not only fruit trees, but hope. And for the first time in a long time, Ayla smiled, thinking about tomorrow. But 3 days later, while watering the saplings, David found something buried next to them, a laminated envelope, sealed against moisture, no return address. Inside, only a handwritten note in English. Father's in custody, but family's large. Mehmet still has uncles who remember him. See you soon. Ayla read the note twice before fully grasping its meaning. Then calmly, she tore the paper into tiny pieces and threw them in the trash. Some ghosts never truly rest. But she learned something important in the past few months. No matter how many times she had to fight, she would always fight. For David, for Julia, for herself, and this time she wouldn't run. This time she was ready for whatever came next.